Hello and good evening. Tonight brings a new collection of Reddit horror stories, strange events, unsettling encounters, and moments that linger long after they're heard. Perfect for winding down, easing into sleep, or keeping you company while going about your evening. Let's begin. Keep your eyes closed. If you feel scared while you're dreaming, stay in that dream. If the fear ignites your skin, wrapping around your throat while you blissfully dream, stay asleep. If you hear a noise that wakes you up out of your control, keep your eyes closed. If you hear footsteps that you can't place, keep your eyes closed. If you feel something touch you, no matter what it feels like, keep your eyes closed. If something speaks to you, even if you recognize its voice, keep your eyes closed. Closed eyes until the crest of the sun shines through the window. I have had these words ingrained on my mind for the last few days since I awoke to my worst nightmare realized. My beloved Bobby, my perfect, kind, sweet fiancé, who never hurt a fly. My wonderful Bobby laying next to me, eyes open in terror, mouth fully opened in a silent scream, staring at the ceiling. I screamed when I awoke to him and saw his state. I cried and checked his pulse, crying out his name for him to come back to me. Bobby, Bobby, wake up. Don't leave me, please don't leave me here alone, I sobbed. Once the police had come and asked me a million questions and the coroner had collected his body, the police asked me one more thing. Is there a camera? The officer asked me. We have one in the living room that faces the kitchen. It's wired to our phones. I responded, wiping my tears with my shirt sleeve. We will be needing access to that, he said, clicking his pen away, just to check on some things. You mean, to check if I somehow killed him with something from the kitchen? I asked, rage filling my eyes. We have to rule it out, miss, don't take it personally, he grumbled. Once the officers had cleared out of our home, he turned to me once more. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry for your loss, he said with a frown, then he was gone. I couldn't sleep a wink the next night. After calling everyone we knew and delivering the bad news over and over while fielding questions I couldn't answer, I was exhausted. Exhausted but wide awake. I couldn't sleep in our bed, that was our bed. I couldn't smell Bobby there, so I made myself a spot on our couch. I put on a show and tried scrolling through my phone when I saw I had a new email. It was the detective assigned to Bobby's case, who asked to see the footage from last night. I sighed and opened my camera app. I exported all the footage for the last 24 hours and sent it over with a highly unsatisfying whoosh. I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I couldn't see us cuddled up on the couch together, laughing while watching a movie. I couldn't take more pain. Once the tears began to flow again, I locked my phone screen and left it on the coffee table. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, until I finally drifted off. I dreamt of me sitting in a lonely bus station. I seemed to have no destination as I watched people get on and off their buses and go on their way. I sat still, watching the passengers, when I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. I turned around and found no one watching me. Actually, the station in my dream had emptied, but the feeling had stayed. I kept looking backwards, looking for the cause of my paranoia, when the color of the bench I was sitting on turned from blue to pink. Oh, I'm dreaming. I watched the colors and wished I could say goodbye to Bobby. When my cell phone rang, it was apparently in my pocket and I held it up to my ear. I hit answer, but the phone continued to ring loudly. Hello, hello. I hear muffled words through the dream phone and a familiar voice. Bobby. Bobby, I asked in a new panic. His voice was muffled, mixed with static and the ringing, but I could make out a few words. Don't wake close. Eyes. The ringing from my phone grew louder and louder, and I felt myself waking up. Why? I screamed into the phone. It's not me. I feel myself fading more and more from the dream. What's not you? I scream. It's waiting. My eyes shot open. In my delirious state, I looked around my dark house, then at my coffee table which held my traitorous phone ringing loudly. My brother calling me back after his night shift. I swipe the call to answer and run my hands through my hair. Hey Jay, I mumble. After another tearful call, I put my phone back and lay down on the couch again, putting my hands over my face. Sighing deeply. Then I hear it, A soft clink of glass. I freeze, hands still over my face, covering my eyes. Another soft clink. My breathing turns harder, and I know my hands have started to tremble. I then hear footsteps walking towards me, a low growl emitting from the direction of my kitchen. I stay frozen. Babe, babe, are you here? Bobby. I start to cry in relief and begin to move my hands when Bobby's words from my dream haunt me. It's not me. I freeze again. Baby, there you are. It's me. Wake up, baby. Oh, I missed you. I still don't move. My dream felt so real. Maybe I am dreaming again, and if it's really Bobby, he will still be here by morning. Babe, come on. I feel cold hands grip my wrists, tugging lightly to pull them off my eyes, but I hold strong. Move your hands. Now, Bobby's voice demands. The cold hands grip me harder, trying to yank my arms down, but I hold on. That's not my Bobby. Bobby has never spoken to me coldly, and he would never grab me like this. Move them or I will take my time with you too. His voice seethes at me. Too. I'm sobbing, but I keep my eyes covered, my hands violently shake. And for hours, Bobby insults me, yells at me, pleads with me, bargains with me just to move my hands. But I don't. After it was quiet for a while, I felt the warmth of the sun start to rise through our window. I shakily move my hands down and find no one there. I whimper because I wanted to be wrong. I get out a piece of paper and write down every lesson I learned that night, and that whatever this thing is, it most likely took my Bobby. I'm tucking the piece of paper into my phone case for safekeeping when I get a call from an unknown number. Hello, this is Detective Michaels. I've been working Bobby's case. A gruff voice answers. Oh, yes. Yes, I'm here. Have you found anything? I ask, wrapping my blanket around my shoulders. Well, we analyzed your living room camera, and we found Bobby. He woke up at about 2 a.m. and walked to your living room. He just stood there for a few minutes facing the wall. Then, he turned and went back to your room. He said, I could hear his pen scribbling something down through the phone. Okay, I tell him, willing him to keep going. And the coroner got back to me just a few minutes ago, and we can clear you off this case from their findings. What did you find? I asked timidly. Well, it appears Bobby had a type of heart attack in his sleep. He continues. A heart attack? He was perfectly healthy. I snapped, still protective over him. It wasn't a health thing, miss. It didn't go on the official report. He paused and lowered his voice into the phone. I'll tell you what the coroner told me, and she said it's just what she thinks, but she's never seen something like this before. Please tell me, I demand. She said that with how Bobby's face was, that he saw something. We don't know what. But he trailed off. But what? She says she thinks he was frightened to death. I pause. That's not possible. That's not real. That can't happen. I mutter into the phone. It can. It is rare, but not impossible. The detective corrects. I'm silent. What could Bobby have seen to? I can't even think it. And miss. A word of advice. Detective Michael whispers, I'm silent. All I'm saying is that if my partner was scared to death right next to me, and it didn't even wake me up, I would only think of one thing to do, he says, while rustling a piece of paper in the background. What's that? I ask. Move. Sell your place, go far away, and pray to whatever you believe in that it won't come looking for you next, he explains. But detective, what if it already has? I ask. He's silent for a moment. Well, then I'll start praying for you too. A deer broke into my house. It will never leave. Some nights, I like to lie in bed awake, paralyzed with the fear that my wife will leave me. This particular night was one of those times. I was covered in cold sweat and lay on the mattress clutching the sheets while my beautiful wife, Angela, breathed slowly, rhythmically, next to me. It was insufferable. In the beginning, it was a kaleidoscope of passion that lasted until just after the wedding. Now, every small action she took felt like it was to spite me. Every movement of her deep blue eyes was done to look at another man. I still loved her dearly, but I no longer felt that it was reciprocated. Now, it felt more like the love you have for a favorite TV show or a stuffed animal. I calmed myself and tried to get back to sleep. It was near enough a full moon, and the bright beams that came through the bedroom window made me feel like I was sleeping with a nightlight again. The curtains fluttered gently, and I realized that I'd left the windows open. I lazily swung my legs out of bed and stood up. I was almost at the window when I realized something. I wanted it open. For as long as I could remember, I've suffered from chronic sinus pain. Sleeping with a little fresh air helped alleviate the problems caused by a stuffy room. Angela, however, hated the chill that came with it. And so the windows stayed shut. But Angela was asleep, and to hell with the reprimanding I'd get from her in the morning. Triumphantly, I turned back around and got into bed again. I wrapped myself in more of the sheet than I usually get and rolled over to get a good night's sleep. Less than 5 minutes later, I was back up again, closing the bedroom window. There really was no need for me to cast aside my wife's preferences. I'm sure she'd do the same for me. Back to bed, and I'm just lying there, staring at a crack in the ceiling. It's deep, noticeable, and twisted into the same shape as my grandmother's varicose veins. I tried to think of how I could fix such a thing. I settled on filling it in with plaster. I rolled over and took my phone from my bedside. I opened notes and left a message for myself to go to the hardware store. I tried never to look at my phone after I went to bed, certainly after Angela came to bed, but in this case, I like to think that I have enough self-control. Half an hour later, I put my phone away, having spent the time silently crawling through my TikTok feed, which had been flooded with Malaysian cooking videos. I tried to lay as still as I could and clasped my eyes shut. My endeavor to sleep was cut short by a commotion from downstairs. Alert, I sat bolt upright. Could it be an intruder, a burglar? I rested a hand on Angela's shoulders and tried to shake her awake. She let out a low, guttural grunt and rolled over. I wasn't even sure if I had heard something and didn't want to disturb her over a false alarm. So I stood up, crept to the baseball bat I had propped up against my dresser, and slowly opened the bedroom door. Standing at the top of the hall, I could hear some movement downstairs. Wearily, I moved past the landing to the stairs and began to descend them. All I could think of at that moment was how the real estate agent who told us about the area's near zero crime rate was lying. I grasped the wooden handle of the bat so hard my knuckles went white. I held it out in front of me as I reached the first floor. The commotion was coming from the kitchen, which I now neared. I held my breath and leapt around the corner. Holding the bat above my head, primed to swing, I confronted the person who broke into our home. Standing in the center of my kitchen was a deer. It wasn't startled by my dramatic entry, and I lowered the bat. For a second, we both stood there, staring at each other. The thing's antlers came up to my shoulders. It had a brown, shaggy coat and inquisitive eyes. I've never been hunting, and this was the first time I saw an animal like this up close. Usually, they'd be rotting on the side of a road. But this creature was breathing heavily, letting out gasps of steam and warm saliva as it did. I noticed that the glass sliding doors were wide open, and I cursed myself for, presumably forgetting to close them before I went to bed. Angela and I had been sitting on the deck drinking for most of the evening after all. I tried to shoo the beast back through the entrance, and when that didn't work, tried to gently take a hold of its antlers and guide it out. As soon as I touched them, it bucked its head wildly and took a step forward. I recoiled in shock, then quietly laughed at myself for being so intimidated by Bambi. I shouted at it, but it didn't move an inch. I thought deer were supposed to be skittish around humans. When my problem didn't immediately fix itself, I obviously turned to the internet. I sat back on an ugly chair my wife inherited that we keep out in the hall for some reason and took out my phone as the deer trotted laps of my kitchen island. I searched online for what to do if a deer gets trapped in your house. No clear results came up, and no deleted Reddit user from 12 years ago made a post about having the same extremely niche problem, as is usually the case. Both my wife and I have lived in the city all our lives until recently. Maybe this was just what we had to contend with. Now we live out in the exurbs. With no idea what to do next, I decided to go wake up my wife. I cursed our house's open plan, as there was no door between the kitchen and the connecting hallway that I could close. I just hoped the deer would stay where it was. Just before I ascended the stairs, I saw it was beginning to make its way further into the house. I let out a long sigh that didn't end until I reached my bedroom. Like a trooper, Angela was still asleep, snoring softly. I walked to her side and crouched down. I put a hand on her shoulder and gently shook her awake. She bolted upright when she finally did, her fight or flight kicking in. Angie, it's just me, I said, trying to help her grasp what was going on. She sat upright and wiped her tired eyes with her palm. Why did you wake me up? She barked, frustrated. We have a guest, I joked, downstairs. A deer broke in somehow. I think I left the patio doors open. A deer, she whispered, still half asleep. Yeah. I tried to get it out, but it wouldn't play ball. I replied. And why did you wake me up? Asked Angela. You know I have to get up at 6. I know, it's just that I need help, I said, suddenly feeling embarrassed. Angela got out of bed, muttering about how I couldn't do anything on my own. She threw on a cardigan and followed me downstairs. I was giving her a more in-depth rundown of what had happened when we reached the ground floor and saw something that stopped us in our tracks. Laying on the hardwood floor was the deer, dead from the looks of it. I took a step closer and saw that its eyes were glassy and its tongue hung lame from its jaws. My wife clasped her hands around her mouth and expressed her disgust with a groan. I crouched by the dead deer and noticed something strange about its body. It seemed deflated, hollow. I reached out and touched its stomach, against my wife's protest, and to my surprise, the deer's side began to sink inwards until it was concave. It felt boneless. I took a frightened step back, and it was at that point that I noticed the long, perfectly straight cut that ran the length of the beast's belly. Blood and organs should have been spewing out, but there was no such thing. It was sterile. I stood up and turned to my wife. Before I could say anything, I saw that she was pointing. I looked, following her index finger, and my gaze found the basement door. It was now wide open. The only things we have in the basement are boxes for storage, and we hardly ever go down there. Guided by Angela, I approached the open door. I took one step into the darkness and felt around for the light switch. I flipped it on, but nothing happened. I flipped it again and again, but still nothing. Before I could ask, my wife went and got a flashlight from the kitchen. She came back, handed it to me, and urged me further into the basement. I descended the rotting, wooden steps. The walls were bare, made from raw concrete with exposed pipes running along them. I reached the bottom floor and found the piles of boxes we'd left down here when we moved in. Bits of old furniture and unloved family heirlooms were scattered among them. I gave it a once-over, but nothing seemed to be down here. Definitely not any member of the deer's extended family. I turned around and walked to the foot of the staircase. That's when I heard it. It was a low creaking noise that froze me where I stood. I slowly turned back around and shone my flashlight at the source. The door to the old, mahogany closet that had been left to gather dust by the house's previous owners had opened, just a crack. I made my way towards it, my light illuminating the wooden behemoth. I stood just in front of it and grabbed the knob. With a shaking hand, I swung the doors wide open. I walked out of the basement and saw my wife leaning against a wall, looking at her phone and rubbing her eyes. She looked up and smiled weakly when I emerged. "Find anything?" she asked. I wordlessly handed the flashlight to her. "I think you should go down there and see for yourself," I told her, without any emotion. She sighed, but took it and traced my path back down the old steps. As soon as she was in, I silently closed the basement door. I took the key that rested on the doorframe and locked it behind her. I rested against the now locked door and slid down it to the ground. I sat and whispered reassurances to myself that I was doing the right thing. I heard a clatter, then Angela started screaming. I covered my ears as she did. The noise was too much for me to bear. Then, the screeching that sounded like it was ripping through her throat stopped. I stayed where I was for another hour. Eventually, I stood and made my way to the bedroom. I lay in bed awake, paralyzed with fear. I closed my eyes when I heard footsteps on the staircase. I tried not to react when my wife climbed into bed beside me. When I did fall asleep, close to sunrise, I dreamt of what I saw in the closet. It looked like a skinned body, with its emaciated arms and legs stretched to the proportions of a sloppy children's drawing. Its head vaguely resembled deer, with the fur pulled back to reveal tight sinew covering bone. The thing's eyes were bulging and milk white. With its size, I had no idea how it could fit into that small deer's skin or my wife's. That was a few weeks ago now. Since that night, I feel like my life has improved dramatically. Angela hasn't argued with or belittled me in weeks. In fact, I haven't heard her speak in over a month. Sometimes she leaves for hours, even days at a time. I rest easy though, now knowing for certain that she isn't seeing someone behind my back. At night, we lay motionless in bed together. I like to trace the seam running down her abdomen with my fingers when we do. Everyone in the town told us to turn back. We should have listened. Beer, chips, and shitty country music. That would be my diet for the next few days. I'd finally wrangled some free time to spend with my best friend and blood brother, Chris. After high school, we fell in different directions. It's amazing the different pace of life going to college causes. Chris studied hard, and with one plaque and a crippling amount of debt later, found himself working as an attorney back in his hometown. Recently, he had his first child with his wife, Lydia. A lovely woman, although I never get to see her, and Chris nearly as much as I want. I went down a different path. I was married at 19 to my former prom queen. We had an extra mouth to feed since 21, and it's been an uphill battle from then on. Now my son has left for college himself, just like his godfather. Not to say I'm not busy, but life has taken an easier turn. Chris and I barely spoke during COVID, but now we've managed to chisel a weekend out of our calendars to catch up. We decided to go camping. After combing through countless cheapo booking sites and possibly getting a virus off one of them, we both thought, fuck it. Tent ready, we set off into the great unknown, planning on pitching up wherever we felt like it, just as we had done in the summer of 1999. Chris showed up at my house in his battered gray family wagon last Friday evening. We packed a broken cooler box and more equipment than we knew what to do with. We were already reminiscing about our youth as we pulled out of my driveway. Remember that time Vlad stole Mr. Hastings' car right after he failed him in English? Chris asked as we crossed the county line. I chuckled a reply. God, yeah, I do. Vlad was insane though, he was always doing shit like that. I said. Hey, can you remember what his real name is? Chris continued. Eugene, I think so anyway. Even his own mother called him Vlad. Do you know what he's doing now? I said as I looked at Chris, who was squinting at the road ahead. Don't drink and drive, kids. Prison, Chris replied, and we both burst into another bout of overcompensatory laughter. Once we were silent again, Chris looked at me and said, I'm serious, and we both started roaring again. I felt like a school kid around Chris. A few years ago, the last time we met up properly, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder on numerous occasions, half expecting a real adult to come take away my beer and replace it with a lecture. I had that same feeling again now, and I'm glad I did. 3 hours later, the road turned to a dirt trail, and then to a road again, albeit a much less maintained one. As we were being buffered around by the potholes, Chris spoke. We're definitely coming up to the place I found. Keep an eye out for any signs, he said as he pounded the GPS, trying to get it to work. Damn thing's having a seizure. Chris had found a serene stretch of woodland whose owner, the widow of an old timber tycoon, allowed and encouraged wild camping. Not long after the GPS failed on us, we came to a fork in the road. There was one sign that pointed to the path left and read, Knacksbridge. Ring a bell? I asked Chris. Sort of, he replied, and after a while of mentally mulling it over, yeah, that must be it. With that, our battered rambler took off down the left road and further into the forest. Eventually, the tree cover began to pitter out as it gave way to the infrastructure of what we assumed to be the sleepy town of Knacksbridge. Thankfully for our navigation, there was only one main road that cut through the village. I stared at the passersby, busying themselves with market stands and vendors. A new mother pushed an old pram. A pensioner sat on a freshly painted bench and fed the birds. Youths kicked around a ball on the grassy knoll. We passed through the heart of the town and drove past the rows of vividly colored houses, all facing out to the road. Some people were out in their front yards, potting flowers or just relaxing. We quickly passed through the village, leaving it in our wake as we drove on. "Seems like a nice place," said Chris, looking around for any indications of a camping ground. "We should have stopped and asked someone back in Knacksbridge." I told him. Just as we were debating on whether to turn around, a small gas station came into view just up ahead. "I'll pull in here and ask someone," Chris said, taking the words right out of my mouth. He turned the car into the station, which was nestled neatly into the tree line. "Want anything while I'm at it?" he asked me as he was getting out. "I think we have enough junk for the weekend." "Oh, wait a second here." I grabbed a tissue and a pen. "Get them to draw a map for us." Chris took it from me with an eye roll and marched off into the station. While I was waiting for him, I flicked on the radio. Nothing but static. Signal after signal, all it picked up was a harsh white noise. I was about to turn it off when I heard something through the hum. I turned up the volume and listened closely. I could hear a faint, undulating pulse. It was soft and routine and was barely audible within the static, but it was there. I jumped back, startled by the door swinging open. I didn't realize how close I'd moved to the radio. Chris climbed back into the car with a sigh. Before I could ask the obvious, he told me, "Apparently, there is no camping site around here. Not only that, but it turns out that we're, and I quote, not welcome round these parts." With that, Chris threw the napkin turn map onto my lap. I held it up to the light and studied it. "They also drew us polite directions on how to fuck off," Chris said earnestly. "Who's they?" I finally asked him. "Some old guy and his wife," he replied. "They seem really brought into that mom and pop shop horse shit." "Was there anyone else in the store?" "A few," Chris clarified, "maybe 3 or 4. "Why? Well, did you ask any of them for directions, or just the obviously sour old couple?" I asked. Chris knew what I was implying and sighed. He wordlessly opened the car door and got out, making his back into the gas station. While he was gone, I popped open the glove compartment and rummaged around for a Tom Waits CD. I was dragged away from my search by the radio turning itself on. I looked at the knob, brow furrowed, trying to figure out if I'd accidentally hit it somehow. The same pulsating beat began to pour from the car's speakers. I quickly switched it off again, feeling the beginnings of a migraine. Before long, Chris trudges out of the store, shaking his head and sighing so dramatically it sounded like a drowning man's dying breath. He climbed back into the car and slammed the door shut. "Bastards," he muttered to himself as he started the car and pulled out of the station and onto the open road. "Any luck?" I asked rhetorically. "They all had the same reply for me," Chris began. "Told me I should leave small towns to themselves, whatever that means. This young one did tell me about a campsite not all that far from here, but it didn't sound like the place." "What should we do?" Chris glanced at me. "Whatever you want." An hour later, we were struggling with a tent. One of the collapsible pipes had snapped and was being held together with duct tape. That duct tape meant it was now too thick to pass through the canvas passage along the top of the tent, which was supposed to give it its shape. Eventually, we collapsed into our camping chairs, defeated, and cracked open a few cans. Chris and I had driven for a while longer after our unfriendly interaction at the gas station, until we came across a dirt road swerving into the forest. We decided to follow it, and eventually came across a perfect little clearing on the banks of a too-good-to-be-true lake. We knew a certain danger came with pitching a tent in the open wilderness, but that's what we came here for. Besides, we weren't all that far from the main road. Chris convinced me to move the tent a little further inland, pointing to the sodden earth creeping in a few yards from the water's edge. We found a nice spot around a minute's walk from the car, and that's where we chose to begin our struggle. The sun was near setting by the time it was up. Once it was, and most of our things had been unpacked, we set about starting a fire. Half a can of kerosene later, the fire was roaring, and we both settled into our camping chairs for the night. "This still beats our last attempt at camping," joked Chris as he took a sip of warm beer. "That it does," I said, sinking into my chair. "That it does." Recreating a scene from Jaws, Chris swung his leg up over the arm of my chair, pulling up his trouser leg. He showed me the burn mark along his calf muscle. "What about your memento from that night?" he asked me. I smiled and shimmied my arm out of the coat sleeve. There was a deep puncture scar just above my bicep. Unlike Chris, I hadn't been near the camping stove when it exploded. I was, however, near enough that a piece of burning metal, the makeshift shrapnel of a butane canister, got lodged in my arm. We weren't the only ones on that trip. A few buddies of ours, and their girlfriends at the time, had accompanied us. We were the only ones dumb enough to try and cook a steak on a tiny stove in complete darkness at 3 in the morning. That last trip didn't exactly go to plan, but this one had gone off without a hitch. The little hiccups we experienced just add more flavor to the story we can tell our kids. It was a long night of talking, drinking, and really reconnecting. Chris bestowed me with his surprise, 2 Cuban cigars he'd kept hidden from me until now. We smoked them and acted as if we were in a cheap gangster film. Our plan was to stay up until dawn, but our middle-aged bodies gave out on us, and we crawled into our sleeping bags shortly after 2. In the hour or so of sleep I got that night, I dreamt of the forest. Not surprising, considering where we were, but that wasn't what made it stick out in my mind. It was the pull. I felt myself falling towards the trees, gliding across the woodland floor as if it was vertical. I kept falling until the forest disappeared and was replaced with darkness. Darkness and a hum. I was awoken by Chris shaking my shoulders. Matt, wake the fuck up, man," Chris said, whispering the first half and shouting the second. I sat bolt upright in my sleeping bag. "Chris," I said, rubbing my eyes, "what is it?" "It's everyone," Chris replied, his voice shaking. Slowly, I crawled out from behind him and we both peeked from the tent. Chris's plastic torch shone over crowds of people, dozens, maybe even hundreds, among the trees. Startled, I grabbed Chris's collar and yanked him back into the tent. "What the fuck," is all I could say. Chris sat directly in front of me and itched his nose. "I got up for a piss and saw them," he said, standing there still as statues. "They didn't do anything. They didn't move an inch. They aren't even looking at us." I found a drop of courage and moved past Chris. I pulled down the zip all the way and stepped out of the tent. Sure enough, the rows and rows of people surrounding us were all looking, uniformly, out to the east of our position, deeper into the woods. Before I could do anything else, I realized that I recognized one of the people. A mother holding her newborn in her arms. I saw her earlier on that day when we were passing through Knacksbridge. "Recognize any of them?" Chris asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Yeah," I replied. "That young mother, I saw her back in Knacksbridge." Chris nodded. "I saw this old man, realized he was the same guy as I saw at the gas station," Chris said, pointing into the crowd. I turned to him. "What the hell should we do now?" I asked. "To the car," Chris replied, grabbing his bag from the tent, having quickly packed the essentials. He made me do the same. Once I had, he gave his torch an extra wind up and we began our walk to the car. The people we walked past looked barely awake. They all stood in a perfect rowing, disappearing into the darkness of the forest on either side. Their mouths slack, their eyes blank. I began to wonder if we'd stumbled into a town-wide trip. Thankfully, my worst fear of one of the catatonics suddenly reaching out and grabbing me didn't come true. Chris and I finally shrugged our way past the figures and to the car. He took the keys from his pocket and unlocked it, swinging his bag into the back and taking his place in the driver's seat. He didn't bother looking back at the formation of people, who all seemed to be sticking to the tree line. I sat in next to him and slammed the door behind me. We exchanged cautionary glances as he put the key in the ignition and turned. The car sprung to life, and so did the radio. The shrill noise it emitted was noxious. My hands went to my head as I bent double over the dashboard. From the corner of my eye, I saw Chris being affected in the same way. It was excruciating. It felt like there was a rabid ferret in my skull trying to claw its way out. Almost debilitated from the pain, I felt around for the knob on the radio, desperate to switch it off. Me and Chris found it at the same time, and as the radio ceased, so did our agony. Reeling, we both slumped back into our seats. Chris managed to compose himself enough to sit up and turn to me. Just as he was about to speak, his eyes widened, terrified, and he grabbed the steering wheel. Oh shit," he muttered to himself frantically, trying to get the car going. Confused, I turned and looked out of the passenger side window. What I saw stuck with me. The masses of people standing perfectly still had turned around and were now staring directly at us. I watched them as the exhaust sputtered out black vapor and the old motor forced itself into motion. When we moved, so did they. The front row was petrified, but countless people began running at us from behind them, furious and sprinting full pelt. As we drove, they flung themselves at the car, fearless and intent on stopping us. The sedan bounced and buffered its way down the dirt trail, climbing over roots and the bodies of those who jumped in front of our wheels. It was hell. I covered my eyes, shielding my sanity from the mass suicide taking place all around me. Finally, one of the townsfolk managed to get onto the car, running straight at us and jumping onto the hood. The pensioner held on for dear life, and once he had a good enough hold on us, started to repeatedly slam his forehead against the windshield. Blood and small cracks spread through the glass. Chris swerved erratically, attempting to throw the old man off. The noise of our screams was replaced with the deafening sound of a tire exploding. Chris was thrown from the wheel as the car spun out of control, tumbling from the dirt path down the slope and deeper into the forest. I held my head in my arms and braced from impact. The old man on the hood was splayed open, bits of him dripping from the branches. Steam bellowed from under the mangled metal. Dazed, I unbuckled my seatbelt, pushed open the car door, and let myself fall to the ground. I vomited and slowly stood up from my hands and knees. On uneasy legs, I walked around the wreck to find Chris in the same position on the ground, nursing what looked like a broken hand. Wordlessly, I helped him to his feet. He formed a weak smile and we swung our arms around each other, keeping ourselves balanced. Before we could form a plan, we heard the familiar, rapid crunching of undergrowth. We turned to see dozens of Knacksbridge residents sprinting over the brow of the hill, some falling over as they tumbled towards us. As best we could, we ran. Impeded by our own bodies, who were ready to give up, we limped on further into the forest. It was Chris who noticed the faint glow up ahead. We were no longer steadying each other, now just trying to outpace the pursuers behind us. Every time I glanced back, they advanced, until I could feel their cold breath on my neck as we ran. My will to survive dragged me violently forward, same with Chris. Desperate and bleeding, we cleared another ridge and fell, tumbling down into a clearing. We helped each other stand, resigned to the fight that would surely ensue when they caught up with us and saw it. Sprouting from the dead center of the small clearing was a brain. A human brain, almost the size of our car. A soft light emitted from the pinkish-gray tissue. Tiny particles danced in the air around us like electric sugar. I felt a dull rattle take over my body as my mind was flooded with a comforting, brown noise. It made my sinuses clear and my ear wax loosen. After a while of just standing there, staring at the infinite wrinkles of the woodland brain, I realized that we were surrounded. The population of Knacksbridge stood around us, expanding out in an incrementing spiral. All of them stood like me, open-mouthed and blank-eyed before the brain. The brain of God. The brain was my God now. It was everything to me. I felt like I'd found my life's purpose. Anything other than blind devotion seemed ridiculous. Within my liver, I felt true meaning begin to manifest for my soul. It was all because of the brain. And then Chris stamped on it. His foot mushed through the gray matter, lodging itself in the gunk. A torrent of white, creamy liquid poured from the gape. The glow ceased as the particles screamed and died and fell to the earthy floor. Chris grabbed me by the collar and shook me until my pupils stopped dilating, until I felt thought again. "Chris," I asked, feeling like I'd just woken up. He smiled and grabbed my forearm, leading me away from that monolith of madness. Around us, countless people lay on the ground, gripped by violent seizures. Foam welled from the edges of their mouth as blood dripped from their eyes and ears. Chores and I stepped over them while we walked back to the car. It was a scene that will never leave me, a scene that is tattooed on my subconscious. I see it every night again when I dream. It must have been 1,000 people. You couldn't make out the forest's ferny floor, with every inch covered by a dying human. They thrashed violently as we made our way past them, trying not to look down. Every so often, light from the full moon overhead, who spit down through the boreal canopy, and highlight a particular death face of anguish. Finally, we found the car. The victims had begun to thin out by now, with only a dozen or so filling our field of vision. I helped Chris push his car from the old oak tree, which was still covered in the blood of that unfortunate old man. Chris told me that other than the torn coolant hose, the damage was just cosmetic. It was safe enough to drive, maybe not all the way home, but certainly far enough to get us back onto the highway. I wasn't sure if I believed him, but I didn't care. I slumped back into my passenger side seat and slammed the door shut behind me. Chris did the same, and after an unbearable amount of rotations in the ignition, the key finally made the ruined car whir to life. I closed my eyes as we started to move. When Chris woke me up, we were surrounded again, this time by flashing lights of blue and red. Cop cars. They had pulled us over driving an unroadworthy vehicle. I never thought I'd be happy to get threatened with 6 months in prison. An hour later, we were waiting in the lobby of the local police station, talking to officers who were confusedly scribbling down notes. In the early hours of that morning, my wife arrived. By midday, we were back at home. I've sat on this story for a few months, not sure of who to tell or where to tell. I've been seeing Chris a lot more frequently since then, and we now, truly, feel like we're back to normal in some strange way. Although my wife must be sick of hearing it by now, I still haven't told the story to my son, or anyone else I know for that matter. I have been quietly trying to find out more about Knaxbridge and have come across nothing. It's as if any mention of the town has been whipped from the internet. You're welcome to try and find out more for yourself, and please, if you are able to come across something about that village, for the love of God, tell me. I know the monolith, the brain, isn't dead. Not really. I can still hear that background hum because it never originated from one place. It's coming from inside my own mind, and it's never going to stop. That's the end of tonight's stories. If you enjoyed them, consider liking the video and subscribing to catch the next collection. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share in the comments which story stayed with you the most. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay cautious in the dark.